have to say, I have a lot of memories of Diane. I guess I feel as though I've known you
Al Pacino, the man from the fiery streets of the Bronx who once carried both hunger and burning hope in his chest.
my whole life.
Decades.
You're a great artist. I remember it and I love it, and I love you forever.
Rose to become one of the greatest legends in Hollywood, with a face carved by struggle and
I came here because I need you, because I care for you,
Please stop it, Michael.
because
a voice trembling like a sacred prayer. He didn't just act, he burned. Every glance was a confession.
I want you to marry me.
The actress Diane Keaton has died at the age of 79.
Every silence a storm, until the whole world bowed before the man who turned pain into art.
Who are already devoted fans, ready to recall her greatness.
Keaton was not just an actress.
From the Godfather to Scent of a Woman. He didn't build a career, he built a cathedral.
She was the attitude and personality of an entire generation.
Each brick laid with anger, genius, and the ashes of old wounds. More than an actor, he was a flame that...
Diane Keaton is one of those actors that whenever she's in a film, you know that it's going to be good because of her presence in it.
refused to die. But even fire grows weary. Behind every ovation, behind every golden statue, there lived a silence, deep, endless, and waiting for a single voice that could reach him again. Diane Keaton, born under the soft California sun, raised on dreams and quiet fire, redefined what it means to be imperfect. She turned clumsiness into art and fragility into strength. From Annie Hall to Reds, she gave loneliness a voice and turned truth into beauty. Her laughter could fill a room, but behind it was a stillness so tender it could break your heart without a word. She never chased fame. She was fame itself, proving that sincerity can outshine glamour and that gentleness can be rebellion. She wasn't just a woman. She was a mirror in which the world saw its own humanity, reflected through grace and courage. When they met, it wasn't just a love story. It was a miracle. Two restless souls born of different fires dared to meet in the same flame. He was the storm. She was the shelter. And between them burned a love the world mistook for fiction, though it was destiny written in scars and silence. For 20 long years, their bond endured quietly, hidden beneath fame and time. And now, after her passing, the world waits for Al Pacino to speak, the man to whom she gave her youth, to finally confirm what millions have long believed. If you've ever given your heart and youth to someone you could never forget, leave a light as a tribute to Diane Keaton, the woman who loved with everything she had and hurt just as deeply. Before there was the love story that would leave the world spellbound, beautiful, overwhelming, and forever unfinished, there was only a boy. A boy who learned too early that love can leave, but hunger never does. What shapes a legend is not only talent, but the cruel beginnings he survived. And for Al Pacino, that beginning was carved in absence, hunger, and the kind of pain that teaches a boy to live with ghosts. Alfredo James Pacino was born on April 25th, 1940, to a Sicilian family whose dreams were larger than their means. When his father walked away before he could even speak, a wound opened that no applause could ever mend. His mother, Rose, carried him to the South Bronx, where ceilings dripped with cold water and tempers burned hotter than the radiators that never worked. The rent was always late, the winters always longer than they should have been. At night, he could hear the neighbors arguing through thin walls. Love and rage tangled into the same sound. Yet amid that noise, his mother found one small mercy: the movie theater. There, under flickering light and the smell of popcorn and damp wool, the shadows on the screen were kinder than the ones waiting at home. In that darkness, a fragile boy learned that stories could turn loneliness into language. That faces 40 tall could teach him how to feel when life around him felt too hard to bear. But the Bronx was no cradle. Drugs, alcohol. I probably would have died if I hadn't found acting, he once whispered. Not as confession, but survival testimony. Acting didn't make him famous. It kept him alive. Every cold night, every bottle, every bruise became a rehearsal for the man he would become. The Bronx had taught him cruelty, yes, but it also taught him truth. And that truth became his weapon. The terrifying silence of Michael Corleone, the wounded roar of Frank Slade, the haunted grace that made pain look holy. To see Al Pacino only as the legend is to forget the boy he once was. The boy who learned to turn hunger into strength, loss into fuel, rebellion into art. The streets gave him scars, but they also gave him his soul. And from that soul, forged in frost and fire, he built the flame the world still feels today. If Al Pacino's childhood was carved from hunger and survival, Diane Keaton's was shaped by silence. A silence so gentle it almost hid the ache beneath. While his world was filled with noise, hers was built on restraint. And yet, both grew up learning the same cruel lesson: that love in its absence can shape a life forever. It's heartbreaking to think that a woman who gave the world so much light began her life in such quiet sorrow. Born on January 5th, 1946, beneath the soft glow of Los Angeles skies, she grew up in Hollywood's shadow, a city obsessed with perfection where emotion was a weakness to be hidden. Her father, Jack Hall, a decent man of quiet pride, built bridges and boundaries in equal measure. Her mother, Dorothy Diane Keaton Hall, once crowned Mrs. Los Angeles 1955, carried the glow of a dream she was never allowed to live. The applause she longed for was replaced by the humid domestic chores, the stage lights by the yellow flicker of the kitchen lamp. Inside their tidy house, everything looked fine. 4 children lined up at dinner. Smiles practiced, feelings unspoken. But beneath the tablecloth of normally, silence pressed against the walls until even love sounded like restraint. I grew up in a family that didn't talk about feelings. Diane would later confess, we simply lived inside them. Those words were not. They were an autopsy of the heart. As a child, she watched her mother's light fade day by day, not in tragedy, but in repetition. Dorothy's life became a slow suffocation. Dishes, schedules, polite laughter masking the ache of a dream deferred. At 9, Diane stood in the kitchen doorway, watching her mother dry her hands and smile at nothing. My mother's life was a warning, not a map. She would later write in her memoir, Then Again. That realization did not harden her. It ignited her. While other girls rehearsed their futures as wives, Diana rehearsed her escape. Her rebellion wasn't loud. It was steady. Teachers called her unruly. Classmates whispered strange. But she was already building an identity out of defiance, teaching herself that quiet can be armor and difference can be destiny. I learned early that if no one hears you, she once said, you have to become the echo yourself. Her salvation came in high school under the trembling light of a borrowed stage. She played Blanche Dubois, the stage soaked in applause. The Tony Award crowned him, but what mattered more was the symmetry. The boy who once begged warmth from a theat's light now stood illuminated by it. For the first time, he believed the dream was real. Those were the crucible years. Not yet the Godfather, not yet the immortal Michael Corleone, but the forge where discipline met desperation. Every no, every frozen night, every stomach that groaned empty became raw material for the truth that would one day ignite cinema. From the Bronx to Broadway, Al Pacino did not escape poverty. He transformed it. He turned every hunger pang into rhythm, every rejection into strength, every bruise into art. Greatness for him was never granted. It was carved bone by bone out of hunger, humiliation, and an unyielding faith that if pain was all he had, then pain would be enough. Pacino's metamorphosis from hungry outsider to cinematic titan was forged not in comfort, but in agony, and sealed forever in the furnace of The Godfather. The studio dismissed him as too small, too unknown, too dark. They wanted someone easier to sell. But Francis Ford Coppola, clinging to his own job by a thread, saw what no one else did. A volcano hiding behind silence. One wrong move and I'd vanish, Pacino would later recall, his voice still carrying the tremor of that fear. Coppola risked everything on one scene. The restaurant assassination, filmed early, desperate to prove his faith wasn't madness. Under the low hum of fluorescent lights, Pacino sat perfectly still, eyes hollow, breath shallow, a man becoming the monster he swore he'd never be. And when he finally pulled the trigger, Hollywood stopped breathing. His stillness roared louder than the gunfire. His restraint shattered every doubt. When the scene ended, he limped off set, his knee torn, his tendons screaming, the pain dulled only by injections and willpower. Yet in that agony, a legend was born. The applause that followed was deafening. But to Pacino, it felt less like victory and more like survival. When award season came and the Academy listed him as supporting actor, not lead, he refused to attend. They still don't see me, he told a friend quietly. The world saw triumph. Pacino felt the loneliness of being proven right too soon. And somewhere on that same set, amid the haze of cigarette smoke and studio lights, he met Diane Keaton. She was warmth where he was shadow, laughter where he was silence. Between takes, she'd tease him out of his stillness, and for the first time, he smiled without acting. No one knew it yet, but The Godfather had birthed 2 legends and one love that would haunt them both for life. Then came Serpico, 1973. To embody a man defying corruption, Pacino stripped himself raw. It left me drained, he confessed later, haunted by that loneliness. He lived in isolation during the shoot, refusing comfort, sleeping little, carrying Frank Serpico's paranoia long after the cameras stopped. Audiences saw moral courage. He carried exhaustion in silence. For every cheer there was, another night, he lay awake, wondering if honesty was worth the ache. A decade later, Scarface burned him anew. Tony Montana, all rage and hunger, mirrored the darkness Pacino had spent years trying to escape. It frightened me, he admitted, how much of myself I saw in him. A prop explosion seared his hand. Critic, peeling. The radiator coughing more than heating. At night, she slept in her coat, her breath fogging the window as snow pressed against the glass. Outside, the city glittered. Inside, silence pressed harder. She learned quickly, New York was no dream. It was a trial by ice. And here, survival wasn't luck. It was art. Morning light came dull and colorless. She queued for auditions in rooms that smelled of stale coffee and hope turned sour. Too tall, too strange. Not the type. The words stung worse than the cold. By noon, she was a waitress, smiling at strangers who never looked twice. By night, she sang in basements so smoky the air tasted like ash, her voice trembling above the clatter of coins in a glass jar. On the worst nights, she walked to stay warm. Her shoes soaked, her pride thinner than her coat. Once she split a sandwich with another girl from the playhouse, laughing through hunger at the absurdity of still believing in anything. The radiator coughed instead of warming, she wrote later, but I stayed because I was afraid all the time and fear became my engine. That fear carried her through weeks of hunger, months of rejection. Dinner was tea and half a slice of bread. Rent was paid with pawned shoes and skipped subway fares. She wrote by candlelight when power was cut, whispering to herself, "Not yet." Some nights, she pressed her hands to the frozen window just to feel something real. The city was deafening, she would say. But I had never felt more unheard. Yet, beneath that silence, a stubborn ember glowed. The holy hunger that would one day feed her art. Then, in 1968, after 2 years of frost and fear, came The Call Here, a Broadway revival seeking someone raw, unpolished, painfully real. She auditioned barefoot, trembling, but alive. The director watched silent, then said, "Don't change a thing." That night, she stood beneath the stage lights, barefoot again, her heart pounding louder than the drums. The silence inside her cracked open into song. The audience didn't see perfection. They saw truth. "I built myself out of fear," she would later say. Fear was the foundation. Every no had sharpened her courage. Every cold night had built her faith. Long before Oscars, before applause, before the world called her extraordinary, there was only this: a young woman walking through snow with empty pockets, and a fire the cold could never kill. That is where her legend began. Not in fame, but in frost. Not in noise, but in silence that finally learned to speak. By the 1970s, the snow of New York had melted into spotlight. The silence that once wrapped Diane Keaton's life was replaced by applause so loud it echoed across the world. The Godfather came first, 1972, and with it everything changed. Ask Kay Adams. She stood in the shadow of Al Pacino's Michael Corleone, a woman who loved, lost, and bore witness to P's price. The role gave her more than fame. It gave her the voice she'd been fighting for since childhood. Then came Annie Hall, 1977, the role that would define her and an era. The awkward laugh, the androgynous charm, the fearless honesty. None of it was. By the early 1970s, both had fought their way from silence and fire to the edge of greatness. And it was on that edge that they found each other. It was 1971, and the world did not yet know the storm it was about to witness. On a dimly lit soundstage in New York, where the smell of dust and film reels hung in the air, 2 young actors waited for their cue. One restless, one radiant, both still unknown. He was Al Pacino, a wiry boy from the Bronx with eyes that carried too many winners. She was Diane Keaton, a California dream wrapped in linen and sunlight. Her laughter, the only thing that seemed to move the still air. When their eyes met for the first time, something unspoken shifted. Not fireworks, but recognition. Like 2 exiles realizing they'd been walking toward each other all their lives. He was supposed to be playing Michael Corleone, a man learning how to bury his heart. But in that moment, Al forgot the script. The way she smiled, hesitant, curious, endlessly kind, felt too real. Diane, watching him fumble for words between takes, saw not a co-star, but a man who wore his solitude like armor. Later she would say, "There was something so sad in him. I wanted to make him laugh." And she did. Between scenes, she teased him, called him Sonny in that soft, teasing lilt, and he, the boy who rarely smiled, began to. They were opposites made to collide. He was fire, raw and untamed. She was silence, luminous and patient. Together they balanced like music and breath. Between takes, they shared sandwiches on the curb, the hum of New York traffic replacing orchestras. She told him about her mother, the pageants, the silence of home. He told her about the Bronx, the hunger, the nights he'd slept in theaters because dreams were cheaper than rent. The director called action. But the real magic happened when the cameras weren't rolling. 2 souls learning each other's language through laughter, glances, and pauses that lingered a beat too long. The chemistry between them began to bleed into the film. Every time Michael looked at Kay, it wasn't acting. It was Al looking at Diane, caught between fear and wonder. Even the crew whispered about it. How their scenes needed no retakes. How the air around them seemed charged. When the film wrapped, neither could say goodbye properly. They stood in the doorway as if leaving would break the spell. She finally smiled, the kind of smile that forgives the world, and said, "You'll call, right?" He nodded, but his silence said more than words ever could. Neither of them knew it yet. But that quiet promise, half heartbreak, was the beginning of everything. The Godfather would make them stars. But before fame, before the applause, there was only this. 2 young hearts, luminous and trembling, finding in each other a reason to believe that love could exist even in the shadows. Fame came like a sunrise. Slow, golden, unstoppable. The Godfather changed everything. Overnight, Al Pacino and Diane Keaton were no longer 2 hungry souls trading lines between takes. They were faces the world could not forget. Reporters chased them through airports, flashbulbs exploding like fireworks. Critics wrote about their chemistry as if it were divine. They don't act, one review they remember. But behind the noise and the lights, something quieter was happening. Two weary spirits finding refuge in one another, as though the universe had conspired to let them meet. While Hollywood roared, they whispered. When news of their closeness began to spread, the world fell under their spell. Magazine covers crowned them the soulmates of the silver screen. Fans wrote letters not to the stars, but to the idea of them. Believing their love made all of cinema's illusions feel distance, but said nothing, as if silence could protect what love no longer could. At the height of their glory, when their names burned on mares from New York to Rome, they were still beneath the silk and the spotlight, just two fragile souls trying to hold onto the peace they'd once found in the quiet of a soundstage. For all the noise that surrounded them, their love remained tender, trembling, achingly human, too pure to be perfect, too beautiful to survive the weight of forever. And perhaps that was the cruel miracle of it. They believed with all their hearts that forever had finally found them, never knowing how close forever was to ending. The fall did not come with thunder. It came quietly, like dusk, swallowing a perfect afternoon. From 1972 to 1981, for nearly 9 years, they had outrun time itself, clinging to a love too fragile for the world that worshipped them. He was 32 when it began. She, 27, two rising stars, whose lives had just been lit by the Godfather's golden fire. But even the strongest hearts can stretch only so far before they begin to tear. Fame, distance, fear. The same forces that once lifted them into legend began to erode what they'd built. For Al Pacino and Diane Keaton, it wasn't betrayal that ended them, but exhaustion. Two souls too weary from loving so deeply for so long. It began with small fractures, missed calls, canceled dinners, letters that went unanswered. He was filming Bobby Deerfield in Europe. She was in New York working on Annie Hall. The time zones grew heavier than miles. He'd disappear into his work, she once said softly. And I learned not to ask where he went inside himself. She wrote him often. Long letters scented faintly of her perfume, pages filled with warmth and worry. Sometimes he answered, sometimes he didn't. The man who once shared every silence now felt unreachable, as if fame had built invisible walls around him. She waited, believing it was just another season, that love would circle back like it always had. But some seasons end without warning. When he returned home, love is to let go before you destroy what's left to save. For decades, fans would still whisper their names together, Pacino and Keaton, not as tragedy, but as proof that even broken love can echo forever. Because some endings don't fade. They just change form from touch to memory to legend. And now at last, the story has come full circle. On October 11th, 2025, Diane Keaton, the woman whose laughter once lit the silver screens of the world, slipped away as quietly as she had once entered them. After years of facing skin cancer with the same grace, wit, and courage that defined her art, she took her final bow at 79. The news arrived with the sunrise, and for a heartbeat, it felt as though the world itself had forgotten how to breathe. Los Angeles woke beneath a gentler sky that morning, the kind of soft gold light she loved to film in, as if even the sun chose to dim its brilliance in her honor. Across the world, tributes rose like a tide of gratitude. Fans left flowers outside theaters that once echoed with her lauder. Directors who had called her muse wrote that she had been a compass for truth. Actors, young and old, spoke through tears about how she made them braver, how she showed them that imperfection could be luminous. Social media became a constellation of memories. Clips of Annie Hall's laughter, stills from The Godfather, quiet moments from Reds, and Something's Got to Give. Every post read like a love letter to a woman who had never played a role she didn't first live. But it wasn't only Hollywood that mourned her. It was everyone who had ever felt seen because of her. Her family released a short statement, tender and simple. She left the world the way she lived in it, full of light. In New York, Broadway theaters dimmed their lights. In Los Angeles, film reels paused for a minute of silence. And somewhere, in an old movie house where the seats still creak and the air smells faintly of dust and popcorn, an audience watched Annie Hall again, laughing, crying, remembering. She had once said that art is show we stay alive, even after we're gone. And in that sense, Diane Keaton will never leave us. Her voice lingers in every frame, her courage in every story that dares to tell the truth. The woman who turned awkwardness into beauty, silence into strength, and loneliness into laughter has simply taken her bow, not to vanish, but to remind us that even when the curtain falls, the light shell left behind still flickers. Somewhere, her laughter still echoes, soft, eternal, and full of life. For Al Pacino, now 85, the silence was unbearable. After half a century of knowing her laughter, the thought of a world without it felt unreal. A close friend said that when the call came, he stood by the window of his New York apartment for a long time, watching Forever shimmer in the early light. She had that glow, he whispered. Even the sky feels dimmer now. Reporters reached out for comment, but Pacino gave none. Only later, through a short statement, came a few trembling words. She was my friend, my light, and a part of me that time could never take. I will love her always. Those who knew them understood what He meant. Their story, the love that once burned bright through The Godfather and lived on quietly for decades, had never really ended. It had simply changed shape, finding new life in memory, in art, in the invisible connection that even age and distance could not erase. Theirs was not a love story that ended in marriage or forever, but in something rarer, mutual reverence. And now, with her gone, the silence between them had finally become eternal. All around the world, people remembered her not just as an actress, but as an idea, the embodiment of honesty, humor, and unguarded humanity. Annie Hall reads Baby Boom. The characters she played became mirrors for those who had once felt invisible. She taught generations that imperfection could be beautiful, that vulnerability was not weakness, but art. As the tributes continued, one line seemed to echo louder than all the rest. She never pretended to be perfect, and that's what made her unforgettable. At sunset in Los Angeles, fans gathered outside the TCL Chinese Theater, leaving flowers, letters, and Polaroids from her films. Someone placed a single wide-brimmed hat, her signature, beside a candle. The flame flickered once, then steadied as if refusing to die. Somewhere across the country, Al Pacino sat in quiet reflection. He did not need to speak. Those who had followed their story for decades already knew the words that would never leave his heart. He had once said, "She was the one that got away, and I let her." Now those words felt less like regret and more like a benediction, because love like theirs does not fade with time. It simply learns to live without form. Diane Keaton's passing is not just the end of a life. It is the closing of an era, a reminder that brilliance can be tender, that laughter can be brave, and that love, when true, can survive even silence. Perhaps that is the legacy they leave behind. That love, even when unfinished, can still be eternal. That sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones that end with a whisper, not applause. And that somewhere beyond the noise, a woman who once filled the world with light has simply taken that light somewhere higher, where it will never dim again. Farewell, Diane Keaton. You once said that love doesn't always last, but it always leaves something behind. And now, as the world grieves your passing, we finally understand what you meant. What you and Al Pacino shared was never about forever. It was about truth. Two souls who met in the chaos and built something holy from their wounds. He carries your laughter still, the world carries your light. And somewhere between silence and memory, the love you gave continues to breathe. You showed us that love, even when it breaks, is never wasted. It becomes the Cho that keeps us alive. So rest now, Diane, not in darkness, but in the soft glow of everything you once illuminated. The story isn't over. It just changed form.